He had everything: luxury cars, private jets, and a mansion that touched the clouds. But one morning, as his driver stopped at a red light, he saw something that froze his heartbeat. There on the sidewalk sat a young black homeless girl, her clothes torn, her hair messy, but her spirit unshaken. She was teaching his little daughter how to read, with nothing but a worn-out book and the brightest smile you could imagine. At first, the billionaire was furious. How could his daughter talk to a stranger like that? But when he stepped closer, he heard her voice, gentle, intelligent, hopeful, and what she said next shattered his pride into 1,000 pieces. In that single moment, he realized that the richest person isn't the one with the most money. It's the one who gives when they have nothing. What happened after that encounter changed his life, his heart, and his entire definition of wealth forever. Welcome to BrainFuel, where every story ignites your mind and inspires your soul. We bring you powerful tales of struggle, courage, and transformation. Stories that remind you how greatness can come from the most unexpected places. Subscribe, sit back, and let's fuel your mind with purpose. The morning air was calm, but something extraordinary was about to happen. It was one of those peaceful Sundays in Central Park, the kind that felt too quiet for a city that never slept. Birds chirped softly, sunlight filtered through the trees, and the world seemed to pause. But for billionaire Richard Carson, that silence was a rare luxury. He was a man used to noise, the sound of ringing phones, constant meetings, and people chasing his attention. He wasn't supposed to be in the park that day. He was supposed to be in a meeting in his glass office, sealing another multi-million-dollar deal. But his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, had begged him for one simple thing. "Daddy, can we just go to the park? No bodyguards, no phones, just us." So he said yes, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of exhaustion, and left his world of power behind for a few hours. As they walked along the winding path, Lily skipped ahead, her curls bouncing as she laughed at pigeons chasing breadcrumbs. Richard smiled faintly, realizing he hadn't really looked at his daughter in weeks. Not really looked. He saw her every day, but between meetings, flights, and endless deals, he'd forgotten what her laughter even sounded like. But that day, something felt different. There was a spark in her eyes he hadn't seen in months. "Daddy, wait here," Lily suddenly said, and ran off toward the old oak trees by the pond. Richard followed at a distance, not wanting to ruin her excitement. Then he saw it and stopped dead in his tracks. Under that oak tree, sitting cross-legged on the grass, was a young homeless girl. She couldn't have been more than 16 or 17, wearing a faded hoodie, jeans torn at the knees, and shoes that looked like they'd walked 1,000 miles. Her skin was sun-kissed, her hair braided neatly, and in her lap lay a small battered notebook filled with writing. She looked fragile, yet there was something calm and composed about her. And there, sitting right next to her, was Lily, laughing, learning, completely at ease. "Daddy, meet my teacher," Lily shouted, waving him over with both hands. Richard blinked. "Teacher?" For a moment, he thought he misheard her. As he walked closer, he noticed a strange scene before him. The girl, whose name he would soon learn was Maya, was teaching Lily using nothing but sticks, stones, and a few old sheets of paper. She drew simple shapes in the dirt, explaining fractions like they were a fun story, not a problem to solve. Lily was smiling, actually solving problems on her own. The same Lily who cried over math homework, who said she hated school, who tuned out every fancy tutor he hired. Now she was laughing under a tree with a stranger who had nothing but a broken pencil and a heart full of patience. Richard stood there, speechless. For a man who spent his life solving the hardest business problems, he suddenly couldn't solve this one mystery in front of him. How could a girl who had so little give so much? Maya noticed him watching and smiled shyly. "Oh, hello, sir," she said softly. "I hope you don't mind. Your daughter wanted help with her homework. I just showed her an easier way." Her voice was gentle but sure, her words clear and confident. There was no fear or tone, no begging, no hesitation. Just kindness. Richard's mind raced. He was used to people approaching him with requests, offers, business ideas. But this girl? She wanted nothing. She was teaching his daughter simply because she wanted to help. Lily looked up, proud. "Daddy, she's really smart." She's better than Miss Karen. Richard raised an eyebrow. Miss Karen was one of the best tutors money could buy. Or so he thought. He crouched down beside them. You're teaching her math? Maya nodded. Yes, sir. Math and reading. She's really bright. She just needs someone to explain things in a way that makes sense. Her eyes glimmered with quiet intelligence. Sometimes teachers forget that learning should be fun. Richard looked at her again. Really looked. The worn shoes, the dirt-stained hands clutching a broken pencil, the tired eyes that somehow still carried light. She was right. He felt something stir in his chest. Guilt, maybe, or admiration. When Lily ran off to chase a butterfly, he took a slow breath and asked, Do you live around here, Maya? She hesitated. Not really, sir. I stay close to the library. Sometimes. He didn't press further. Her voice had that tone, the one people use when they don't want pity. Instead, he smiled. You're good with her. Most tutors can't even keep her attention for 5 minutes. Maya shrugged gently. Kids just need patience. I like teaching. It makes me happy. And that was it. No big speech, no self-praise, just simple truth. For a man whose world revolved around profit and power, that moment hit him like a wave. Here was someone with nothing, no money, no status. Yet she carried herself with more purpose than most executives in his office. When Lily returned, holding a handful of flowers, she hugged Maya tightly. Daddy, can Maya come to our house? She can help me with homework every day. Richard forced a smile. We'll see, sweetheart. But inside he was unsettled. He couldn't stop wondering how a homeless girl in a park was teaching lessons that no elite tutor could. As they left, he glanced back. Maya was still there, sitting quietly, flipping through her little notebook, her lips moving silently as she read. She didn't notice him watching. For some reason, Richard didn't feel like the billionaire in that moment. He felt small, like a man who had everything but still missed a point. That night, after tucking Lily into bed, he found himself staring at the city skyline from his penthouse window. The lights of New York shimmered below, like stars scattered on the ground. Yet all he could see was that girl under the tree. Her calm smile, her torn clothes, her words echoing in his mind. Sometimes teachers forget that learning should be fun. He thought about his own life. Endless deadlines, emotionless meetings, a world built on numbers and deals. For the first time in years, he felt something deeper than success. He felt curiosity. Who was Maya? Where did she come from? And how did someone with so little manage to give his daughter the one thing he couldn't buy? Joy in learning. Richard didn't know it yet. But this encounter under the park tree would change his life forever. Because sometimes, the most powerful lessons don't come from boardrooms or billion-dollar plans. They come from people who have nothing, except wisdom, heart, and the courage to share it. That night, after their trip to the park, Richard Carson sat at the dinner table with his daughter, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He couldn't shake the image of that homeless girl, Maya, sitting under the tree, teaching Lily with nothing but patience and imagination. It haunted him in the strangest way. All through dinner, Lily couldn't stop talking about her new friend. Daddy, Maya says math is just like a story. Every number has a meaning. Did you know that? She chirped, her voice filled with excitement. Richard smiled faintly. Oh, yeah? Sounds like she's quite the teacher. She is, Lily said, eyes glowing. She's funny, too. She made a game out of fractions. You should have seen it. For a moment, Richard's heart warmed. It had been so long since Lily had looked this happy about learning. Usually, her face would twist into frustration or boredom whenever homework came up. But tonight, she was glowing, proud of herself, proud of learning, and proud of Maya. That name lingered in his thoughts. Maya, a girl who lived on the streets, but carried wisdom that money couldn't buy. After Lily went to bed, Richard poured himself a glass of water and sat by the window, staring at the glittering skyline. The city looked alive, like a living organism pulsing with light and motion. Billboards, skyscrapers, endless cars, all proof of progress and ambition. Yet, somewhere in that same city, a teenage girl was sleeping behind a library with a stack of donated books and a notebook full of dreams. He didn't know why it bothered him so much. He'd seen poverty before, countless times. He donated millions through his company every year. He built schools, sponsored programs, and funded charities. But never had it felt real like this. Never had it touched his own life so personally. Because now it wasn't just a story. It was his daughter's teacher. The next morning, as he sat in his office, surrounded by glass walls and polished furniture, Richard tried to focus on work. His assistant was reading out numbers, profits, losses, projections, but his mind was still back in the park. "Mr. Carson, are you all right?" she asked gently. He blinked, realizing he hadn't heard a word she said. Yes, I'm fine," he muttered, rubbing his forehead. "Just thinking." "About business?" she asked. "No," he said quietly. "About something that money can't fix." The assistant smiled politely, not understanding, and left the room. Richard leaned back in his chair. The empire he'd built, Carson Enterprises, was known for innovation, luxury, and success. But as he looked around, everything suddenly felt empty. The more he thought about Maya, the more he realized she represented something he'd forgotten: purpose. That evening, when Lily returned from school, she ran up to him with a backpack full of homework and said, "Daddy, can we go to the park again? I want to see Maya." He hesitated. Part of him wanted to see her too, but another part, the cautious, businessman part, wondered if it was safe or appropriate. Yet the excitement in Lily's eyes melted his hesitation. "All right, sweetheart," he said with a smile. "Let's go." The park was quiet that afternoon, but when they reached the old oak tree, Maya wasn't there. Lily's face dropped instantly. "She said she comes every day," Lily murmured, looking around. "Maybe she's late?" Richard looked around too, scanning the benches, the fountain, the small crowd of joggers and street vendors, but there was no sign of her. Something in him felt uneasy. "Let's ask around," he suggested. He approached a nearby pretzel vendor, an older man with a friendly face. "Excuse me," Richard said. "Have you seen a young girl here? Around 16 or 17. Wears a gray hoodie, always carrying a notebook." The man nodded slowly. "Ah, you mean Maya?" Richard's eyes widened. "You know her?" "Yeah, everyone here knows that kid," the man said. "Smart one, always reading. She sleeps behind the library over on 5th Street. Quiet girl, never causes trouble." "Behind the library?" Richard repeated softly. "Yeah," the vendor said. "I give her leftovers sometimes. Sweet kid, always says thank you." Richard's chest tightened. He handed the man a 20 and thanked him, but the words barely came out. As they walked back to the car, Lily asked, "Daddy, why does she sleep behind the library?" He paused for a moment, unsure how to explain the harshness of life to an 8-year-old. "Because sometimes life isn't fair, honey, but she's strong. She's doing her best." Lily nodded, her small face thoughtful. "Then we should help her." Right. Her innocence hit him harder than any boardroom negotiation ever could. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, thinking about the library, about the cold pavement Maya must be lying on, about how unfair it was that someone so bright was forgotten by the world. He walked to his study, where the soft hum of city lights filled the room. His shelves were stacked with books, untouched trophies of intellect, while Maya's were probably torn, borrowed, and shared. He opened one at random, a book about leadership. The first line made him stop. "The true measure of a leader is not how much they earn, but how much they lift others." He closed the book slowly. Maybe he had been looking at success the wrong way all along. The next morning, before heading to work, Richard made a detour. He drove quietly through the city streets until he reached the library. He parked nearby and stepped out, scanning the alley behind it. And there she was. Maya sat cross-legged on the cold concrete, wrapped in a thin blanket, her notebook open as she scribbled something with intense focus. She didn't even notice him approach. For a long moment, Richard just stood there, watching, humbled. A billionaire standing over a homeless girl who still believed in education more than most people with everything handed to them. He finally spoke. "You really love learning, don't you?" Maya looked up, startled, then smiled weakly. "Oh, Mr. Carson, I didn't expect to see you here." "I wanted to thank you," he said gently, "for what you did for Lily. She really looks up to you." Maya's eyes softened. She's a wonderful girl. She just needs someone to believe in her. Richard looked around at her small pile of books, weathered, dog-eared, but neatly stacked, and felt a lump in his throat. "And who believes in you, Maya?" he asked quietly. She paused, her smile fading. "No one yet," she whispered. Richard took a deep breath. "Then maybe it's time someone did." That was the moment something inside him changed. For the first time in his life, Richard Carson, the billionaire who had everything, realized that the people with the least often carry the greatest lessons, and he was ready to learn. When Richard returned home that night, his mind was racing faster than the city lights outside his penthouse window. He couldn't stop replaying that moment. Maya sitting on the cold ground behind the library, clutching her notebook like it was gold. The image hit him harder than any business deal ever had. A girl like her, young, brilliant, invisible to the world, teaching his daughter with such grace and purpose. He leaned back in his chair and sighed deeply. He wasn't a man who got emotional easily. He'd built his empire by being tough, rational, and unshakable. But for some reason, that girl had shaken something loose inside him. He couldn't understand how someone who had nothing could give so much to others. No one was paying her. No one was helping her. Yet, there she was, smiling, teaching, inspiring his daughter, while she herself had no roof over her head. It didn't make sense, and yet it made perfect sense. The next day, Richard took Lily to the park again. He didn't tell her why. He just wanted to see if Maya would be there. And sure enough, she was sitting under that same oak tree, notebook in hand, surrounded by a few neighborhood kids this time. They were gathered in a small circle, listening closely as she spoke. Her voice was calm but full of life. "If you understand the story behind the numbers," she said, "you'll never be afraid of math again." The kids laughed as she turned equations into characters. 3 became the peacemaker, 9 was the dreamer, and 0, she explained, was the quiet hero who gives others meaning. Even from a distance, Richard was impressed. There was something magnetic about the way she taught. She made learning feel human, alive. When she noticed Lily running toward her, Maya's face lit up with a smile. "Hey, Lily, I saved you a spot." Lily sat cross-legged, eager and focused, and once again, Richard found himself standing back, watching in silence. After a while, he walked closer. The other kids dispersed, and Maya smiled shyly when she saw him. "Good afternoon, Mr. Carson," she said politely. Richard nodded. "You're really good at this," he said, genuinely impressed. She blushed slightly. "Thank you, sir. I just love helping them learn. Most of these kids can't afford tutors, so I do what I can." "You teach here every day?" he asked. "Almost every day," she replied. "As long as I can find paper and pencils, I'm here." He studied her for a moment. Her tone wasn't bitter or sad. It was full of quiet pride. It wasn't charity to her. It was purpose. When Lily ran off to play near the fountain, Richard sat down on the grass beside Maya. It was something he never thought he'd do, sit on the ground in a public park beside a homeless teenager. But somehow, it didn't feel strange. "I still don't understand something," he began softly. "You're clearly gifted. You could be in college. Why are you out here instead of in school?" Maya's expression changed. For the first time, she looked down. "I used to be," she said. "I was top of my class. But after my mom died, things got hard. Rent went up, bills piled up. Eventually, we lost the apartment. I tried to keep going, but..." She trailed off and gave a small shrug. "When you're homeless, people stop seeing you. You become invisible." Richard felt a lump in his throat. She said it so plainly, so matter-of-factly, as if she'd accepted it. But there was still fire in her eyes, not bitterness, just determination. "I couldn't afford school anymore," she continued. "But I didn't want to stop learning. So I read whatever I could find. Sometimes people throw away books. I picked them up. Knowledge doesn't care where you live." That last sentence hit him hard. Knowledge doesn't care where you live. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just a homeless girl, but a teacher, a leader, someone with the kind of courage that couldn't be bought. "Maya," he said after a long pause. "You're remarkable. You know that." She smiled faintly. "I'm just doing what I can. Everyone has something to give." Richard chuckled softly. "Most people with everything don't give half as much as you." For a moment, they sat in silence, the sound of children laughing around them. The sun was beginning to dip below the skyline, casting golden light through the trees. It painted the park in warm colors, almost cinematic, like a moment frozen in time. Then, as Lily ran back holding an ice cream cone, Maya stood and said, "I should go, sir. Library closes soon, and I need to return a few books." "Wait," Richard said, standing up too. "Can I give you a ride?" She shook her head quickly. "No, thank you. I walk. It's not far." "Please," he insisted gently. "It's the least I can do." She hesitated, then smiled politely. "Maybe another time, Mr. Carson." And with that, she waved goodbye and disappeared down the path. Richard stood there watching until she was out of sight. Later that evening, while driving home, he couldn't shake her words. "Knowledge doesn't care where you live." It kept echoing in his head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. When he tucked Lily into bed that night, she whispered, "Daddy, I like Maya. She makes learning fun. She said one day she wants to be a real teacher." Richard smiled softly. "She already is, sweetheart. She already is." But inside he was restless. There was something deeply wrong about the picture. A girl so gifted living on the streets, while others with privilege wasted opportunities. He thought about all the people he knew, investors, politicians, CEOs. None of them could hold an audience the way Maya did. She was exactly what the world needed more of, but the world had left her behind. The next morning, Richard called his assistant. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," he said firmly. "Cancel? Sir, you have a call with the board." "I said cancel it," he interrupted. "I have something more important to do." He didn't explain. He just grabbed his keys and left. He wasn't sure what his plan was. All he knew was that he couldn't just walk away this time. He couldn't let someone like Maya slip through the cracks again. Because for the first time in a long, long while, Richard Carson, the man known for buying companies and building empires, had found something he couldn't put a price on. He found meaning, and that meaning had a name. Maya. That day, Richard made a silent promise to himself. If life could take away Maya's chance, then he would give it back, no matter what it cost. Because sometimes the greatest investments aren't in stocks or real estate. They're in people who remind you what truly matters. The next morning, Richard couldn't concentrate on anything. His office overlooked the skyline, glass towers gleaming under the morning sun. All he could think about was that young girl sitting on the cold ground, teaching with nothing but chalk and hope. He stared at his reflection in the window. The man looking back at him was powerful, rich, respected, but he suddenly felt small, empty. He had everything. Private jets, villas, board seats. Yet, a homeless teenager had more purpose than he did. That thought stayed with him like a splinter. When his assistant Caroline walked in with a stack of reports, Richard didn't even glance at them. "Caroline," he said quietly, "I need you to find someone for me." "Of course, sir." "Who?" "A girl named Maya. She's young, probably 17 or 18. Dark skin, curly hair, usually seen around the city library or the park near Elm Street." Caroline blinked. "Should I contact the police?" "No," he said quickly. "No police. Just see if you can find out who she is, where she came from, and be discreet." Caroline hesitated. She'd never heard her boss sound so gentle before. "Understood, sir." As she left, Richard exhaled. He wasn't even sure what he planned to do once he found her. All he knew was that someone with that kind of heart didn't deserve to be forgotten. Days passed. He visited the park a few times, hoping to see her again, but she never showed up. The spot under the oak tree was empty. The laughter of kids was gone. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Caroline entered his office again. "Sir, I think I found her," she said. Richard looked up immediately. "Where?" "She's been staying near the downtown community shelter. Volunteers said she helps the younger kids there with homework. Sometimes she sleeps in the reading room when there's space. Richard nodded, grabbed his coat, and headed straight for his car. The drive to the shelter took him through parts of the city he hadn't seen in years. The streets were narrow, lined with flickering lights and worn-down buildings. Children played soccer with a crushed can. A man sold hot dogs from a rustic cart. When Richard stepped out his car, he drew glances. His tailored suit and polished shoes didn't belong there, but he didn't care. Inside, the shelter smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Volunteers moved between tables, serving soup and sorting clothes. In the corner, a small group of kids sat around a young woman, Maya. She was explaining something on a torn piece of cardboard. Her eyes lit up as she spoke, and the kids listened like she was telling a story straight from a fairy tale. When she saw Richard, surprise flickered across her face. "Mr. Carson?" He smiled softly. "You weren't at the park. I started to worry." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "I've been here, sir. Some of the younger kids need help before school starts. So, I come when I can." He glanced around the shelter, the dim lights, the chipped tables, the old books. "Do you sleep here too?" he asked gently. "Sometimes," she admitted, "if there's space. If not, I stay near the bus station. It's safer there." Richard's jaw tightened. She said it so casually, like it was normal, like sleeping near a bus station was just part of life. After a pause, he asked, "Do you still want to finish school?" Her eyes softened. "Every single day," she said quietly. "But that costs money I don't have. So I just teach others what I remember. It keeps my mind sharp." He nodded slowly, his heart heavy. Then he said, "Would you let me help?" Her expression changed instantly. "Help? You mean give me money?" He shook his head. "No, I don't want to give you anything. I want to invest in you." She frowned slightly, confused. "Invest?" "Yes," he said firmly. "You have talent, drive, purpose. People like you can change lives. I saw it with my own daughter. You taught her more in one afternoon than some teachers do in a year. You don't belong on the streets, Maya. You belong in a classroom, maybe even in front of one." She looked down, her fingers gripping the edge of the cardboard. "Mr. Carson, I appreciate that, but I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," he said. "It's belief. I believe in you." Maya's eyes shimmered with emotion she tried to hide. "Why me? You don't even know me." Richard smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but I know potential when I see it. And I built my entire life investing in the right people." There was silence between them, heavy, meaningful. Then she whispered, "If I say yes, what happens next?" He exhaled. "You go back to school. I'll cover your tuition, housing, everything you need. But one condition. When you graduate, you have to promise me you'll pay it forward. Help someone else, the way you helped Lily." Maya's lips trembled into a smile. "That's a promise I can keep." That night, Richard called his legal team. He set up a scholarship fund under her name, the Maya Hope Foundation, designed to help homeless youth return to education. He didn't do it for recognition. He didn't tell the media. It wasn't about publicity. It was about something deeper, a quiet redemption. For years, he'd measured success in profits. But that night, as he watched Maya walk out of the shelter with a glimmer of hope in her eyes, he realized something profound. True wealth isn't what you keep. It's what you give back. Over the next few weeks, Maya's life began to change. She was enrolled in a community college, received new clothes, and moved into a small dorm. Every morning, she studied like her life depended on it. Every afternoon, she still returned to the shelter to tutor the kids. And every evening, she wrote in her notebook, the same old one she once held behind the library, now filled with new dreams. Richard often visited, quietly watching her progress. He never made her feel like a project or a favor. He treated her like an equal. One day, Lily asked him, "Daddy, why do you help Maya so much?" He smiled. "Because one day, sweetheart, someone like Maya might help the world." And he meant it. That moment marked the beginning of something extraordinary, not just for Maya, but for Richard too. He had once built skyscrapers out of ambition. Now he was building lives out of compassion. And for the first time, he wasn't just a billionaire. He was human. The first day Maya stepped onto her new campus, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The building stood tall and bright. The air buzzed with energy, and the sound of laughter echoed through the halls. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged somewhere again. Her clothes were simple, a white blouse and worn-out jeans, but her smile was priceless. In her backpack were only a few notebooks, a pencil case, and a letter from the college confirming her scholarship. At the bottom of that letter was Richard's signature. She ran her fingers over it before putting it away. "You got this," she whispered to herself. But deep down, she was terrified. Everyone around her looked confident, stylish, connected. They belonged to a world she had been locked out of for years. And now, she was trying to re-enter it, quietly, humbly, one step at a time. Her first class was literature. The professor, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes, asked everyone to introduce themselves. When it was Maya's turn, she stood and said softly, "My name is Maya Carter. I love stories, especially ones about people who start with nothing, but still manage to change the world." The room fell quiet. A few students smiled. Others looked curious. By the time she sat down, her heart was pounding. But she felt something shift inside her, a small spark of confidence. For once, she wasn't invisible. Days turned into weeks. Maya spent most of her time in the library, reading, writing, and studying late into the night. She was behind in some subjects, but she made up for it with pure determination. Sometimes, she called Richard's assistant to update him. "Please tell Mr. Carson I'm doing my best," she'd say with a small laugh. "I won't let him down." And she didn't. Her professors began to notice. One even called her a mind that sees beyond the surface. But Maya didn't just study. She still taught. After classes, she volunteered at the community shelter where she once lived, helping kids with homework, reading stories, and organizing small learning groups. When people asked why she did it, she'd smile and say, "Because I promised someone I'd pay it forward." One evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, Maya sat outside the campus cafe with her laptop open. She was writing a small essay about dreams and second chances. Out of nowhere, she got a call. It was Richard. "Maya." His voice came through warm and steady. "How's my favorite teacher doing?" She laughed. "You mean your student?" "Same thing," he joked. "Listen, Lily's been talking about you nonstop. She says you make learning feel like magic. She wants to visit your campus one day." Maya's heart softened. "Tell her she's always welcome." Richard paused and said, "I meant what I said, Maya. You have a gift. Not everyone can turn pain into purpose. I'm proud of you." For a moment, Maya didn't know what to say. No one had ever told her that before. She wiped a tear and whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Carson. You believed in me before I believed in myself." But not everyone at the school understood her story. Some students whispered about her background. They couldn't imagine how a homeless girl ended up in their classrooms. One day, in the cafeteria, a girl named Chloe smirked and said loudly, "Hey, isn't that the scholarship girl? The one who lived in shelter?" A few others laughed. Maya froze. Her hands tightened around her tray. But then, instead of walking away, she turned and said calmly, "Yes, that's me, and I'm proud of it, because every night I slept on the floor made me stronger than any insult you can throw at me." The cafeteria fell silent. Chloe looked away, embarrassed. From that day on, people saw Maya differently. They didn't just see a girl with a scholarship. They saw a survivor. Months passed, and Maya's grade soared. Her professors nominated her for a mentorship program, and she began tutoring other struggling students. She became known for her kindness and her calm confidence. Richard often attended her community events quietly, standing in the back, watching her teach. He never interfered. He just observed. Each time he saw her explain something to a child or inspire a student to keep going, his eyes softened. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. One day, Maya organized a small reading event at the shelter. She invited kids, parents, and local volunteers. As she stood at the front, holding a microphone, her voice trembled slightly, but not from fear, from pride. "When I was young," she began, "I thought success meant escaping the place you came from. But now I know true success means going back and lifting others with you." Applause filled the room. Richard, standing near the exit, smiled proudly. Lily, holding his hand, whispered, "Daddy, she's amazing." "Yes," he said softly, "she really is." After the event, Maya found him outside by his car. "You came," she said, surprised. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. "You were incredible." She looked up at him. "You know, I used to think people like you didn't notice people like me." Richard smiled gently. "Maybe people like me just forgot how to look." That line stayed with her long after he drove away. That night, as she walked back to her dorm, the stars glimmered above the city. She pulled out her old notebook, the one she'd carried since her homeless days, and flipped to the first page. It was filled with equations, doodles, and quotes from books she once read under streetlights. At the bottom, she wrote something new. "Never forget where you started, because that's where your strength lives." She closed the notebook, clutching it to her chest with a smile. Back at her dorm, she received an email, a scholarship award for her outstanding community impact. She stared at the screen in disbelief. The prize included a speaking opportunity at the city's youth education conference, the same one where CEOs, teachers, and leaders gathered every year. When she called Richard to tell him, he said, "Then I guess the world's finally about to hear what I already know, that you're unstoppable." She laughed. "You really think I can do it?" "I don't think," he said proudly. "I know." That night, Maya sat by her window, looking out at the skyline. The same city that once ignored her was now cheering for her. She thought about every cold night she'd spent without shelter, every moment she'd felt forgotten. All of it had led her here. She wasn't the same girl anymore. She was a living reminder that faith, kindness, and opportunity could rewrite anyone's story, no matter how broken it began. The day of the education conference arrived like a storm of nerves and excitement. Maya stood backstage, her hands trembling slightly as she held her note cards. The stage lights leaked through the curtains, casting long, golden lines on the floor. She took a deep breath and looked around. Everywhere she turned, she saw professionals in suits, journalists with cameras, and banners that read, "Reimagining the future of education." It felt surreal. Just a year ago, she was teaching math under a tree, her students sitting on the cold pavement. Now, she was about to speak to some of the most powerful people in the city, maybe even the world. In the front row, she could see Richard and Lily. He gave her a small nod, calm, reassuring. That one look reminded her that she wasn't alone. She whispered under her breath, "This isn't about me. It's about them, the ones still out there unseen." A voice announced her name through the speakers. "Please welcome Maya Carter, student teacher and founder of the Maya Hope Initiative." The applause was warm, but Maya barely noticed it. Her heartbeat drowned out the sound. As she stepped onto the stage, the light hit her face, blinding her for a second. Then she looked up and the fear disappeared. She saw faces, real people, curious, expectant, hopeful. And so she began. "When I was 16, she said, her voice steady but soft, "I lost everything. My home, my family, my safety. For months, I lived on the streets, but I never stopped learning." The room fell completely silent. "I would pick up torn pages from trash cans, read books people left behind, and teach children who couldn't afford school. I used to believe I had nothing, but now I know I had something priceless. I had knowledge, and knowledge doesn't care where you live." Richard's eyes widened. He remembered those exact words, the same one she had told him months ago under that oak tree. Maya continued, her confidence growing with every word. "One day, a man saw me teaching his daughter outside a library. He could have ignored me. Most people did. But instead, he chose to see me. And that changed everything." All eyes shifted toward Richard, though Maya didn't mention his name. "That man reminded me that one act of belief can change a person's entire life." Today I stand here not because of luck, but because someone decided that I was worth investing in. A few people in the audience nodded. Others wiped their eyes quietly. Maya took a breath, stepped forward, and said, "There are thousands of kids just like me, brilliant minds trapped in impossible situations. They don't need pity. They need opportunity. They need someone to believe in them before the world does." At that moment, her voice broke slightly, not from nerves, but from emotion. We can't fix every problem overnight, but we can start by seeing people again, by looking past their circumstances and finding their potential. Because sometimes the greatest teachers are the ones sitting outside, holding a notebook under a streetlight. The audience erupted in applause. But she wasn't done yet. She smiled to the tears and said, "And to the man who believed in me when I had nothing, thank you for reminding me that humanity still exists." The crowd stood to their feet. Cameras flashed. Journalists scribbled notes. Richard stayed seated, stunned, his heart swelling with pride and humility. Lily clapped so hard her hands turned red. For a brief moment, Richard felt something he hadn't in years. Pure gratitude. He realized that this wasn't a success. It was hers. And yet, somehow, she had given him back his sense of purpose. After the speech, people swarmed around Maya. Reporters asked for interviews. Schools wanted her to speak. Organizations wanted to donate. But through all the noise, her eyes searched for one person. And when she saw Richard waiting near the exit, she smiled and walked straight toward him. "Mr. Carson," she said softly, tears glimmering in her eyes. He smiled. "That was incredible, Maya. You moved everyone in that room, including me." She shook her head. "You did that. You gave me the chance to be heard." "No," he said gently. "You gave me the chance to listen." They both stood there quietly, the weight of everything between them unspoken. Gratitude, growth, pride. As they walked out together, reporters tried to follow, but Richard stopped and turned to them. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "you just heard from someone who represents the future. If my wealth built walls, her wisdom built bridges. And from this day forward, I'm committed to funding programs that help young people like Maya, because she reminded me that the best investment a person can make isn't in buildings or businesses, it's in people." The crowd erupted again. Maya looked at him, speechless. He turned back to her and said quietly, "The world needs more of you, Maya, and I'm going to make sure it finds them." That night, the news exploded. Homeless girl inspires billionaire to launch global education fund. From the streets to the stage, Maya Carter's story breaks the internet. Billionaire and homeless student team up to change the future. Maya's inbox filled with messages from strangers, students, teachers, even CEOs, all telling her how her story inspired them. But she stayed humble. She returned to her classes the next morning, smiling at the same people she'd seen every day. And when her professor asked how it felt to change the world, she said simply, "It feels like I finally have a purpose again." A few days later, Richard invited Maya and Lily to his home for dinner. The once intimidating mansion felt different now, warmer, livelier. Lily ran up to Maya and hugged her. "You were amazing on TV. My friend said you're a hero." Maya laughed. "I'm not a hero, Lily. I just told my story." Richard smiled from across the table. Sometimes that's what heroes do. After dinner, they stepped out onto the balcony. The city lights sparkled like stars. Maya looked at them and said softly, "It's funny, I used to watch these same lights from the street and wonder if anyone up here could ever see me." Richard replied, "Now the whole city sees you." She looked up at him. "And what about you? You've helped me so much. What's next for you?" He thought for a moment, then smiled. "For the first time in my life, I don't know, but maybe that's the point. Maybe helping others find their path is mine." Maya nodded slowly. "Then I guess we're both still learning." The two of them stood there quietly, teacher and student, mentor and friend, both changed forever by a chance encounter outside a library. The wind carried a faint sound of laughter from Lily inside, and for the first time in a long time, Richard felt at peace. He realized something profound that night. Money could build skyscrapers, but kindness could build legacies. And Maya, The girl who once had nothing had become the proof of it. The following month unfolded like a dream, the kind that feels too good to be true, yet somehow real. News of Maya's story spread far beyond the city. Across the country, people began to talk, not just about her speech, but about what it meant. She had become a symbol of possibility, of what could happen when someone was seen instead of ignored. Schools invited her to speak. Newspapers ran features titled "The Girl Who Taught Hope." Even government officials reached out, asking how she and Richard planned to expand the Maya Hope Initiative. At first, it was overwhelming. Maya wasn't used to cameras, meetings, or microphones. She still preferred the simplicity of a chalkboard and a small group of kids sitting in a circle. But Richard kept reminding her, "You're not just teaching now, Maya, you're leading a movement." And he was right. Together, they launched the Maya Hope Foundation on a national scale. Its mission was simple but powerful: to find underprivileged youth with academic potential and give them access to education, mentorship, and housing, the very things Maya once lacked. They began in her old city, transforming the rundown shelter where she once slept into a vibrant learning center. The walls were painted bright blue, bookshelves lined halls, and a large mural of a girl reading under a tree covered one wall. Underneath it were the words, "Knowledge doesn't care where you live." When Maya saw it for the first time, tears filled her eyes. She whispered, "Those were my words." Richard smiled. "Now they'll belong to every child who walks through that door." The foundation grew quickly. Volunteers signed up by the hundreds, teachers, students, even retired professionals who wanted to give back. Donations poured in from companies inspired by Maya's speech. But growth came with challenges. The workload was enormous. Every day brought new requests, paperwork, and problems to solve. Maya barely had time to rest. She would stay up late reviewing applications, reading letters from struggling teens who reminded her of herself. One night, she sat in the office, exhausted, reading a letter from a 14-year-old girl named Amara. "Dear Miss Maya, I want to be a scientist, but my family can't afford school. My mom says dreams are for rich people. Is that true?" Maya's eyes filled with tears. She picked up her pen and wrote back immediately. "Dreams are for everyone, Amara, and I'm going to make sure you get yours." That night, she didn't sleep. She planned. By morning, she presented Richard with a bold idea. "I want to take the foundation on the road," she said. "Visit small towns, meet kids where they are. There are thousands like Amara who'll never see our posters or our website. We need to go to them." Richard leaned back, impressed. "You want to create a mobile education program?" "Yes," she said, her eyes shining. "A traveling classroom with books, tablets, and teachers. We'll call it the Hope Bus." He grinned. "You really don't stop dreaming, do you?" "Dreams built this," she replied. Within months, the first Hope Bus hit the road, a bright yellow coach transformed into a classroom on wheels. It carried supplies, volunteers, and a promise to find brilliance in the most unexpected places. Every stop brought new faces. Kids who once thought college was impossible now laughing, learning, and believing again. But not everyone believed in them. A few critics called the program a Billionaire's PR stunt. Others claimed Maya was just a charity poster girl. When one article accused her of using her past for fame, it hit her hard. She read it alone in her dorm, her hands trembling. "They don't understand," she whispered. That evening, she told Richard she wanted to quit public speaking. "Maybe I'm not meant for this," she said quietly. "Maybe I should just teach." Richard looked at her for a long moment. Maya, he said gently, "when you were on the streets, you didn't stop teaching, even when no one was watching. You didn't do it for attention then, and you're not doing it for attention now. You're doing it for the ones who still need hope. So don't you dare let anyone silence that." His words struck deep. Maya wiped her tears and nodded. "You're right. This isn't about me. It never was." The next day, she gave one of her most powerful talks ever. Not in a conference hall, but outside, in front of the Hope Bus, surrounded by children and parents. "Some people think helping others is charity," she said. "It's not. It's humanity. and I will never apologize for believing in people. The crowd erupted in cheers. Even Richard, standing in the back, had to look away to hide the tears in his eyes. From that day forward, Maya's confidence returned, stronger than ever. She began mentoring other young leaders in the program, encouraging them to share their own stories. One of her students, a quiet boy named Malik, told her he wanted to be a teacher just like Miss Maya. Another girl, Nina, said she wanted to start a reading program for single mothers. Every success story reminded Maya of her own journey. She wasn't just helping others. She was building a generation that believed in giving back. Months later, the foundation received a special invitation from the United Nations to speak about education reform. When Maya stepped onto that international stage, surrounded by leaders and diplomats, she began her speech the same way she had at the local conference. When I was 16, I was invisible, but someone saw me, and that changed my life. Today, I'm here to make sure no child remains unseen. When she finished, the room stood in thunderous applause. Cameras flashed, people wept, and at that moment, the world truly saw her. That evening, back at the hotel, Richard joined her on the balcony overlooking the city lights. He smiled quietly and said, "You've come a long way from that park bench, Maya." She laughed softly. "And you've come a long way from that boardroom." He nodded. "Funny thing is, I thought I was teaching you about success. Turns out you were the one teaching me." Maya looked at him thoughtfully. "What did I teach you?" He smiled. "That success isn't about how high you climb. It's about how many hands you pull up with you." She smiled back, her heart full. That night, Maya received a message from Amara, the girl who had written to her months ago. It read, "I got accepted into science camp. Thank you for believing in me." Maya closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. It was proof, real, tangible proof, that what they were doing was working. As she looked out over the glowing city, Maya whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning," because she knew deep down the movement wasn't about her story anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been forgotten and finally had someone to believe in them. And that, she realized, was the truest form of wealth, not money, not fame, but impact. The world now knew her name, Maya Hope. From television interviews to global conferences, everyone wanted to hear her speak. Sponsors lined up, donations soared, and every major newspaper had a headline about the homeless girl who changed education. But with the spotlight came shadows. The more attention the foundation gained, the more people wanted a piece of it. Some wanted to help, others wanted to profit. And as the organization grew larger, the simplicity that once defined Maya's mission began to blur beneath layers of management, meetings, and money. It started small, a few board members suggesting strategic partnerships. That didn't quite feel right. Then came corporate sponsors who wanted to use the foundation's image to polish their own reputations. One day, during a board meeting, a sleek-suited executive named Marcus leaned forward and said, "Maya, you're an inspiration, but if we rebrand your message just a little, we could attract 10 times the funding." Maya frowned. "Rebrand." "Yes," Marcus continued, smiling. "Less about poverty, more about success. Let's show you as a symbol of achievement, not struggle. Investors love that." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But that's not the point. We exist to lift up those who have nothing, not just celebrate those who made it." Marcus's smile didn't fade, but his tone changed. "If we don't adapt, the foundation might collapse under its own weight. Sometimes, image matters more than ideals." The room went quiet. Maya looked around. Some members nodded in agreement. She felt her stomach tighten. "If staying true to our mission means growing slower, then so be it. I won't trade authenticity for applause." Later that evening, Richard found her sitting alone in the office, staring at the city lights. He could tell something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked gently. Maya sighed. "They want to change everything. They want to turn this into a business, not a movement." Richard leaned against the wall. "You knew this day would come. When something pure grows, people see opportunity, not purpose." She looked at him, frustration in her eyes. "I don't want to lose what we built, Richard, but I don't want to sell it either." He smiled softly. "Then don't. Remember why we started. You taught my daughter math, but you also taught me something bigger. That kindness doesn't need a brand." Maya nodded, taking a deep breath. "Then we fight for it." Weeks later, the tension grew. The board voted on new policies that would shift control away from Maya, giving power to corporate investors. Richard tried to block it, but he was outnumbered. When Maya walked into the next meeting, she noticed her name missing from the top of the foundation's leadership documents. They had quietly demoted her to ambassador. It felt like a punch to the chest. She stood silently for a moment, looking at the papers. "So this is how it ends," she said softly. Marcus smirked slightly. "It's not the end, Maya. It's just evolution. You'll still be the face of the foundation. You just won't handle operations. Let the professionals run it." She clenched her fists. Professionals who never spent a day in poverty, who never looked into the eyes of a hungry child. You can't run hope from a boardroom. Richard slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. You can't erase her from her own mission." But the vote had already passed. That night, Maya packed her things and left the headquarters quietly. No press release. No drama. Just silence. She returned to the same park where it all began. The park where she had once taught a stranger's daughter how to add and subtract. The bench was still there, worn and old. She sat down and closed her eyes. "Maybe they were right," she whispered. "Maybe I don't belong in that world." But as she sat there, she heard a familiar sound. Children laughing. She turned and saw a small group of kids huddled around a woman, teaching them with a piece of chalk on the pavement. It was like looking into the past. A little boy looked up and shouted, "Miss Maya, is that really you?" She smiled, wiping her tears. "Yeah, it's me." The kids rushed over, hugging her. One of them proudly showed her a notebook full of math problems. She knelt down. "You're learning fast," she said. He grinned. "We're part of Hope Bus too." Her eyes widened. "There's a second one?" "Yeah. A teacher named Nina runs it. She said you taught her everything." Maya froze. Nina, one of her first students. At that moment, she realized something profound. The movement hadn't died. It had grown beyond her. She didn't need a title or a foundation to change lives. The seed she planted had already taken root everywhere. Days later, she received a call from a journalist asking about her removal. The story spread fast. Billionaire board oust founder. The public was furious. People began canceling donations to the Corporate Control Foundation. Volunteers left in protest. Richard held a press conference, standing beside Maya. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice firm. "Without Maya, there is no Hope Foundation. And if integrity no longer has a place in that building, then neither do I." With that, he resigned, and within days, launched a new organization with Maya called Hope Alive. This time, they structured it differently. No investors, no board politics. 100% transparency. Every dollar went directly to education, not executives. The first project of Hope Alive was deeply personal. They built a new learning center right next to that old park bench and called it The Beginning. At the opening ceremony, hundreds gathered. Children held signs saying, "Thank you, Miss Maya." As she stepped onto the stage, she looked out at the crowd. Faces of all colors, all ages, united by the same belief, that hope could be taught. Her voice trembled as she began, "They took my title, but they couldn't take my purpose, because purpose doesn't need permission." The audience erupted into applause. Richard smiled beside her, whispering, "You just won back everything that matters." Later that evening, as the sun set over the new center, Maya stood in front of the mural, a painting of her teaching under a tree, surrounded by children. She traced her fingers along the wall and whispered, "We're still here." And for the first time in months, she felt peace. The world could take her name off papers, remove her from meetings, or twist her story, but it could never erase her impact, because hope once lit can't be contained. Years passed, and the name Hope Alive spread far beyond anyone's imagination. What started as one small classroom under a tree had grown into an international network of learning centers, mentorship programs, and traveling schools. Across cities and villages, children wore bright blue shirts that read, "Hope lives here." Maya had become a symbol of possibility, not just for the poor, but for everyone who'd ever been underestimated. Her story was taught in universities, featured in documentaries, and even studied in business schools as an example of leadership driven by compassion, not profit. But Maya never changed. She still spent her mornings visiting local centers, teaching, laughing, and listening to children's dreams. To her, titles and fame meant nothing. What mattered was seeing a child's eyes light up when they learned something new. Richard, now older and grayer, had stepped back from most of the public work, letting Maya take the lead. He often joked, "You're the CEO now, chief educator of optimism." And she'd laugh, replying, "Only if you're still my chief encourager." They remained close, like family. In many ways, they were family. One morning, Maya stood before a group of new volunteers, giving orientation. She shared her journey with her usual humility, ending with, "You don't need to be rich to change lives. You just need to care enough to start." As the room erupted in applause, she noticed a familiar face standing quietly in the back, a young woman with gentle eyes and a confident smile. When the session ended, the woman approached her and said softly, "Miss Maya, I don't know if you remember me." Maya tilted her head. "You look familiar." The young woman smiled wider. "You taught me math. In the park. Years ago." Maya's eyes widened. "Lila?" She nodded. "It's me." For a moment, Maya just stood there, speechless. The little girl she'd once taught with chalk and paper scraps now stood before her, grown and radiant. They hugged tightly, both of them overwhelmed by memories. When they finally sat down, Lila said, "I never forgot that day. You told me learning was like magic, that it could open doors I didn't even know existed. You were right." Maya smiled, eyes glistening. "And look at you now." Lila laughed. "I just graduated from college, top of my class in education. I came back because I want to join Hope Alive. I want to teach just like you." Maya's voice trembled. "You already are what I always hoped these kids would become." It was a full circle moment. The student had returned to become the teacher, but there was someone else who wanted to see Maya that day. As Lila stood, she gestured toward the door. "There's someone waiting outside who wants to say hello." Maya turned, and her breath caught. Standing there, older but unmistakably familiar, was Richard's daughter, now in her 20s. Her eyes filled with emotion as she said, "Miss Maya, it's been a long time." Maya blinked back tears. "It sure has, sweetheart." The young woman smiled. "You probably remember, but you're the reason I fell in love with learning. I used to hate math, until that day in the park. My dad never stopped talking about you. He said you changed the way he saw the world." Maya covered her mouth, tried to hold back tears. "He changed mine, too." They sat together in the garden of the Learning Center, reminiscing. Richard's daughter shared stories about how her father had continued working behind the scenes, funding small education programs quietly through Hope Alive. He said it wasn't about fame. It was about finishing what you started together. Maya smiled warmly. That sounds like him. Then Lila chimed in. "He told me something once, too. He said, when you find someone who teaches with heart, follow them, because they're building the future." Maya looked up at the sky, whispering, "He always believed in people before they believed in themselves." There was a long, peaceful silence, the kind that only comes when hearts are full. A few months later, Richard passed away peacefully in his sleep. The news hit Maya hard, though she knew he had lived a life full of meaning. At his memorial, held at the very first Hope Alive Center, hundreds gathered, students, teachers, parents, and children whose lives had been touched by his generosity. Maya stood before them, holding back tears as she spoke. "Richard once told me that success isn't about how high you climb, but how many hands you pull up with you." He lived those words every day. Without him, none of this would exist. He didn't just build a foundation, he built faith. Her voice cracked slightly. "And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure that faith keeps growing." The crowd stood in silence, many crying, some holding candles. In that moment, Maya realized something profound. Richard had started as her rescuer, but ended as her greatest student. In the following years, Hope Alive launched new programs in Richard's memory. They created scholarships called the Vision Fund, giving young leaders around the world resources to build their own community schools. Lila took charge of one such program in South Africa. Richard's daughter joined as a board member, overseeing global outreach. And Maya, now known internationally as the teacher Hope, continued her mission one classroom at a time. One sunny afternoon, as she walked through a bustling campus filled with children, she overheard a young boy telling his friend, "One day, I'm going to be like Miss Maya. I'll teach the whole world." She smiled to herself. Later, standing in her office, she looked at the framed photo on the wall, a picture that first day in the park. Her, a chalkboard, and a little girl who didn't even have shoes. Underneath it, engraved on a plaque, were words Richard once said to her. "Hope is not charity. It's a chain reaction." Maya ran her fingers over the words, whispering. And the chain keeps going. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maya stood on the balcony of the Learning Center. She could hear laughter, music, and the hum of life from the children below. For a moment, she closed her eyes and remembered the smell of rain that day in the park, the sound of Lila's laughter, and the moment Richard's car had stopped by chance. All of it, every heartbreak, every miracle, had led here, from homeless to hero, from forgotten to unforgettable. She smiled softly and whispered to herself, "He saw me when no one did. Now I see them all." The world may have called her a teacher, a leader, or even a visionary, but to Maya, she was still just a girl with chalk on her hands and hope in her heart. And somewhere she knew, if Richard could see her now, he'd be smiling, proud not of her fame, but of her faith, because the little girl who once taught his daughter in a park had gone on to teach the whole world. Years slipped by like pages in a book, and the world kept changing. Technology advanced, cities grew taller, but one thing remained constant: the light that Maya had sparked. Her name had become a movement, not a memory. Children in distant countries who had never met her still knew her story. The girl who once taught in a park and built a world of hope. Hope Alive was now in over 40 nations. Thousands of teachers carried its message, mentoring millions of children. Every classroom had one quote painted on the wall: "When someone believes in you, you become unstoppable." It was a line Maya once said offhand during an interview, yet it had become the anthem of her life. By this time, Maya was older. Her hair was streaked with silver, her voice softer, but still filled with that same fire that had once captivated an entire world. She didn't travel as much anymore. Her body was slowing down, but her mind, her spirit, was unstoppable. She spent her mornings in the garden of the first learning center, the beginning. She'd sit on a wooden bench, sipping tea, watching children run past. Children laughing, learning, and dreaming, just like she once did. Sometimes they'd stop to talk to her, without even realizing who she was. "Good morning, Miss Maya," a little boy would say. She'd smile and ask, "What did you learn today?" And every time, she'd feel her heart fill with quiet joy, because she knew this was what success truly looked like. Not fame, not fortune, but futures. One day, while reviewing letters from students, she came across one that stopped her heart for a moment. It was from a girl named Amara, not the same Amara she'd once written to years ago, but another one from a small village in Kenya. The letter read, "Dear Miss Maya, I watched your story on a tablet our teacher showed us. I want to be like you. I want to build a school here one day, so no girl in my village ever has to stop learning." Maya read it twice, smiling through tears. Different name, same dream. She called one of her assistants and said, "Let's visit her village. It's time to plant another seed." A few weeks later, Maya and a small team flew to Kenya. The air was warm, the skies endless and blue. As the car rolled into the dusty little town, children came running behind, shouting her name. When Maya stepped out, Amara was waiting, a shy 12-year-old girl with bright eyes and a notebook clutched to her chest. "You're really here," Amara whispered. Maya smiled and knelt to her level. "And you're really the girl with a dream." Amara laughed nervously. I don't have much, just ideas. Maya touched her shoulder gently. Ideas are everything. I started with nothing but chalk and courage, and look what it became. Amara grinned wide. Then maybe I can start with a stick and dirt. Maya chuckled. That's how I started, too. That day, they sat under a tree, a mirror of Maya's past, drawing plans for a small school. The children watched, fascinated, as Maya guided Amara through every step. And once again, she felt it, the same spark that started her journey. It was as if time had folded in on itself, bringing her right back to the beginning. Months passed, and the new school opened, small but beautiful, painted with bright colors and filled with laughter. Amara named it the Hope Tree. At the opening ceremony, Amara stood on stage and said, Miss Maya taught me that even the smallest classroom can hold the biggest dreams. The crowd cheered. Cameras flashed. But Maya wasn't thinking about the noise. She was thinking about a park bench, a little girl named Lila, and a man named Richard who had believed in her before the world ever did. That night, as the stars shimmered above the Kenyan sky, Maya sat outside with Amara. Miss Maya, the young girl asked softly, do you ever get tired? Maya smiled. Sometimes. But then I see kids like you, and I remember why I started. Will you ever stop? Amara asked. Maya looked up at the stars. No, even if I'm not here, hope doesn't end. It moves on through people like you. Amara leaned her head on Maya's shoulder. Then I'll keep it alive. Maya closed her eyes, whispering, That's all I ever wanted. Years later, after Maya passed peacefully in her sleep, the world mourned, but not with sorrow alone. Every Hope Alive Center lit candles in her honor. Children across continents drew her portrait on classroom walls. Teachers shared stories of her courage, her kindness, her laughter. At the original park, where everything began, thousands gathered for a memorial. In the center stood the same bench where she'd once taught. On it, a small plaque read, Here sat a girl who had nothing but gave the world everything. Lila, now a teacher and director of Hope Alive International, stood before the crowd. Her voice trembled as she spoke. She taught me numbers when I was a child. But she also taught me something bigger, that every human soul carries potential, no matter where they come from. She believed in me before I believed in myself. And today, I stand here because of her. Tears streamed down her face as she continued. Maya may be gone, but her voice still whispers through every classroom, every book, every child who dares to dream. The crowd erupted in applause, not out of sadness, but gratitude. Months after the memorial, a group of children came to visit the park. They didn't know much about the story, just that a teacher named Maya once sat there and changed lives. One of them, a little boy, turned to his friend and said, Do you think we could do something like her one day? His friend shrugged. I don't know. Maybe. An older girl, hearing them, smiled and said, You don't need to be like her. Just start where you are. That's what she did. The boy thought for a moment, picked up a piece of chalk, and began writing on the sidewalk. 3 words. Simple, powerful, eternal. Hope starts here. And in that moment, though Maya was gone, her spirit lived on in every classroom, in every teacher, in every child who believed they could change the world with nothing but heart. Her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who dared to dream beyond their circumstances. Because sometimes all it takes is one act of kindness, one spark of belief, one teacher sitting on a park bench, to ignite a fire that never goes out. Final line, cinematic YouTube closing. She started with nothing, but left the world with something money could never buy. Hope.